Okay, thank you so much to everyone who's joining in live, and thank you to everyone who's watching this. This is a recording of an online session. So, Bruno Groening made the very simple yet very bold statement that God is everywhere. God is everywhere. Of course, that's very different than how I was raised and how many people were raised. Many of us were taught that God was far, far away, up in a cloud, looking down on us, and certainly not all around us, and certainly not, as Bruno Groening said, actually inside of us. Not only did Bruno remind us that God is everywhere, but he reminded us that God is in everything and in everyone. So if Bruno Groening's teaching on this subject is true, and we have to find out for ourselves whether it's true, it's not enough just to have the thought, oh, God is everywhere, just to have it once or to say, yes, that's true, and then to not think about it ever again. It's important for us to find out for ourselves and actually to practice these things that Bruno Groening taught, to practice the awareness. God is everywhere. God is all around me. To really, maybe even to mentally remind ourselves, God is everywhere. It's a very beautiful practice. I do it sometimes, just walk down, go for a walk, and just gently think to myself, God is everywhere. God is in everything. And then look around, look at the world as I say those things. And having that thought and having the intention to see it, I begin to start to have a very special experience where I really do feel God all around me, holding me. And I start to see. I don't know how to quite describe it. Things start to take on a different color, brightness, and I just feel a feeling of closeness with everything around us. So it's very important not only that we study, actually, maybe it's not so important that we study what Bruno Groening shared with us, but that we really practice it, that we really take it to heart, and even maybe more important than, or equally as important, is that we find out for ourselves if it's true. Here's a quote from Bruno Groening. I am not one of those gullible ones, and I don't want you to be either. You shouldn't believe what I am telling you, but I have checked it in myself. Do you think for yourself? So, what Bruno Groening shared with us was not something he read. It was something he found out inside of himself that he knew directly. And he's inviting us very strongly, actually, encouraging us to find out for ourselves if what he says is true. If, in fact, God is everywhere and in everything, just that one realization could completely change our lives. We would never feel alone. We would certainly never treat someone harmfully. Just that one idea, deeply practiced, could literally change our lives. So I invite people to really reflect deeply on these things that Bruno Groening shared. That's why I like to sometimes say we don't so much study Bruno Groening's teachings at these meetings as we practice them. So let's do that now. Let's spend a little time really feeling, sensing, inquiring. Is Bruno Groening right? Is God everywhere and in everything? And for anyone who's joining in who's new or watching this video who's new, Bruno taught a very simple practice called tuning in. where you just observe the body, having the will, the intention to absorb life healing energy. So let's spend a few minutes doing that now and also inquiring, feeling, sensing, reflecting. Is God everywhere? Is God in everything? And most importantly, is God inside of each one of us? Meaning you, meaning me, meaning we. So, once again, to practice tuning in, just observing the body, having the will, the intention to take in the good. Letting go of thoughts, and so people are welcome to continue tuning in throughout this entire meeting or while you're watching this video. So, if God is in everything, and it's becoming more and more my felt experience that that's true, it's very hard to convey into words. There's a sense of presence, a sense of something all around me, something good. I don't have it all the time, but I have it more and more as I practice what Bruno taught and as I really become mindful. See, we've been taught wrongly. We've been taught that God is far away. And so we have this habit of thinking and even looking at the world as if God is nowhere near us. So we're in this process of breaking that habit, of unlearning that very idea, and initially investigating if what Bruno Groening taught is true. Interestingly enough, this very idea is really at the heart of, what's written in the Bible. There's a verse where it's written that Christ said, I am in the Father, He is in me, and I am in you. And so if we really reflect on that and we take that verse seriously, what it says is that God is in us and that Christ is a link for that, which is, of course, a profound mystery. And there have been many, many hundreds of thousands of books written about what that means, that Christ sort of bridges the gap. But we don't have to get into anything complicated. We can just very simply rest in this idea that through the grace of a helper such as Christ, that God literally is in us. And of course, that's what's written in that sort of um, but there's another idea that Bruno Groening makes it even more direct, is that, the Christian idea is until we accept Christ or have this specific belief, only then is God in us. But actually, Bruno Groening points to it even a little more directly, that the divine spark lives in us always, and it's a part of our soul, our very being. So let's really sink into that for a moment, that God actually lives within us. We don't have to do anything for that to be true, according to Bruno Bruni. There are many things we do need to do to experience that, to know that. And according to Bruno Groening, um, and actually, that's also pointed to in the Bible as well, when Christ would say, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is within." So the repent part is that there are things we need to do to experience the kingdom of heaven, and yet its location is already inside of us, according according to Jesus. Bruno says that, points to that very same truth in a very simple way. God is in everyone and in everything. So let's take a moment and really, as Bruno said, listen deeply inside yourself. See if we can feel that which is sacred, that which is holy, already inside of us. Now we have some work to do to sort of notice that it's inside of us, because we've been taught that it's everywhere but inside of us. We've been taught that human beings are sinful and evil. So how could God be inside of us when human beings are? And yet, I believe that's an incorrect teaching, and that's the conclusion I've come to, and Bruno Groening helped me come to that. So let's look within. Let's see and feel deep within ourselves. There's something sacred. There's something holy. And let's spend a little time on the very, very precious quest to notice that it's there. So if this idea of Bruno Groening's is accurate, then it's very much worth our time, energy, and attention. If God lives inside of us, it's my experience that God does live inside of each one of us. I feel that God lives inside of me, and I don't believe I'm anything special. I've had that experience over and over that the divine is closer than close to me, and I don't believe it's a relationship that only I have with the divine. I believe it's all of our relationship. And this path is really, in a sense, noticing, um, really noticing what's already there and noticing the habits we have that block us from that and coming to value God and value putting our attention there. Because obviously, if we spend all of our time focused on things other than God, well, we're not going to feel the presence of God very often. Bruno Groening was very critical of this idea of going to church on Sunday and kind of forgetting about it the rest of the time. Well, great, you feel close to God for an hour, but what about the rest of our life? That's not to criticize church by any means, but to criticize this attitude of, well, all I have to do is just go to church. Well, according to Christ, and according to Bruno Groening, inside of us literally is divine treasure. And it's just up to us to spend some time seeking it out. And a very important part of that process is coming to value this feeling of connection with God, of being close to God, of being guided by God. Because if we don't value it, we're going to put our time, energy, and attention into other things. That's just how that's how we are as human beings. What we value, we put our time, energy, and attention on. And so, you know, a big part of the spiritual path, and maybe you know, is really coming to value moment by moment divine connection, making that a priority. Because if we make other things a priority, then other things will be a priority. Christ spoke of having a foundation. It's written that he spoke of having a foundation that could withstand the waters and the storms. Well, what foundation is that? What is it that can allow us to meet calamity with calmness? I know of nothing in the world that can do that. I know of no pill, no therapy, no retreat center, no herb that can do that. And I like all those things. I'm not the biggest fan of pills, but all those things are um, have their place, and as we look around the world is ever changing, and daily, each one of us faces different kinds of challenges. And I believe we're all looking for that which is solid and dependable, which 24/7 we can count on. And there is nothing that I'm aware of, and if anyone else is aware of it, please let me know. I would love to know, but I'm not aware of anything that can give me that sense of peace, that reliability, that utter reliability, other than God. Because nothing I perceive around me, and I don't think any one of us perceives anything in this world that's permanent. And yet we have this habit of looking to the world or looking to things as if they'll give us that peace, as if they can be our foundation, if they can be our rock that we can build our life upon. And that's not to say things such as relationships or work can't be really helpful, really nourishing, really supportive. But can any one of those things really be our rock? So let's spend a little time in silence, seeing what is our rock, what's our foundation, what's our base. Bruno Groening said, trust, confidence in the good, which is another way he used of referring to God, the good. Trust in the good is the foundation of divine order in our lives. That's what he said the foundation is. We need to find out for ourselves. Let's spend a little time in silence reflecting and asking that question. What is our rock? What's our foundation? So, there's a parable from the great psychologist Carl Jung that I believe really gets at the essence of Bruno Groening's teaching. And I wasn't able to find the exact parable, so I have to do it by memory. And it goes something like this. There was a tribe, and they sent they sent people out to look for the waters of life. The waters of life, that which really nourishes, fulfills us, connects us to the divine. And so they went far and wide, these different people looking for the waters of life, and eventually they found it. They found a bubbling brook that was just pouring and gushing over with this divine energy, this divine water, this divine stream. And so they drank of it and they were healed and they were happy, um, and they sent word back. And so then the tribe moved there, and they all, they were practically bathing in it. They were drinking it and celebrating. And then slowly rituals began to evolve around it. Well, we can only drink from the waters on this day, or we can only, before we drink from the waters, we have to say this, and that, so forth and so on. And soon, um, structures began to be built around this bubbling spring. And then as other people heard about it, and the structures became more and more. And by structures, not just actual buildings, but rituals and rules. And slowly but surely, the spring started to bubble less strongly. There was less vitality in it. And at a certain point, there was next to no vitality left because the people had really choked the vitality out of it. And they were now focused more on the ritual and the structure than the actual waters of life themselves. And so the waters of life just very gently withdrew themselves and went to bubble elsewhere. And so this to me is really the whole essence of what Bruno Groening taught, is for us to not get caught up in the forms of things, in the form, in this case, of course, the form of religion. He said, you know, if people had gotten the message 2,000 years ago, I wouldn't have needed to come. There's all these structures that have been built up around Christ, and we have to be very mindful not to build similar structures up around Bruno Groening. What's important is that we each develop the direct connection to this energy, whether we call it the waters of life or whether we call it the healing stream, the Heilstrom. It's so important. Bruno himself said to be connected to God. That is everything. And I can watch it in myself as I make YouTube videos, as I offer meetings. I can feel this pressure inside myself to, oh, well, I need to write books and I need to do this and and I may do all those things. And there's nothing wrong with all those things so long as I maintain my connection with the essence. And I fall away from it, all throughout the day, lose that sense of connection to God and come back. It's when we begin to make things complicated that things get complicated and things get diluted. Bruno Groening said, "After I am gone, the time will be right for everyone to experience help and healing within themselves." Everyone will become their own physician, he said. So, we need to be very mindful to keep it simple, both in, this is very pertinent for me as someone who shares this information to keep it simple and keep it focused on the essence. However, it applies to all of us, even if you're not someone who's necessarily sharing this information, in how you practice what Bruno Groening taught and how I practice what Bruno Groening taught. Because it's very easy to be like, oh, well, I'll just look at a picture of Bruno, or I'll just read one of Bruno Groening's books, or as opposed to, oh, I'll just go to a community hour. None of those things are bad. I'm not discouraging any of those things. Whenever I look at a picture of Bruno, my sense of connection to the divine goes up a notch. And let's not lose the essence. The essence is for each one of us to have our own connection to God, and for each one of us to become our own physician. So let's spend a little time in silence, reflecting on all this. Just maybe noticing any way that we've stepped away from the core of what Bruno Gröning taught and got a little caught up in sort of other things that can then be a distraction from what's most important, our direct connection to God. It seems to me that one of the major blocks to us seeking God is a lack of humility, some some flavor of arrogance or superiority. Now, it might not be so much superiority, over other people, or but in this 21st century, we really have this capacity to be very independent. I mean, it's literally possible to never leave your home. It's possible to work from your home. It's possible to have food delivered to your home. I don't necessarily recommend that lifestyle, but in terms of, you know, how disconnected from life it's possible to be, it's very possible. How disconnected from nature. So it's very possible to think like I don't need God. Like I can order I can order food from my computer, you know? And obviously there's a little bit of truth to that. Like yes, you can live that way, but can we live well? So it's very easy to not value God, you know? You hop on the internet and you can talk with people all around the world. There's movies, um, there's endless amounts of stimulation, education, distraction, um, connection, even. And technologically, the things we can do is, we can fly to the moon. I saw a YouTube video of someone who made their own rocket. Now, granted, it didn't get them to the moon, but they were able to, they built their own rocket and flew 5 miles or something like 5 miles and lived to tell the tale. So, the human race is, from a certain perspective, we've become quite powerful, quite independent, and the gains are quite short term. Here's what Bruno Groening has to say about this. People have withdrawn from nature, giving over to culture. That means people have raised themselves only to be lowered. But we cannot manage without nature. Man doesn't have the right to withdraw from it. So we've raised ourselves only to be lowered. What on earth does that mean? Well, yes, with anyone with enough resource and education can now build a rocket and literally fly up into the heavens. Obviously not the eternal heavens, but what we call the heavens, the sky. So we can literally raise ourselves up. And can we have peace? Can we have health? With all this technology and, they're working on artificial intelligence, um, the capacity to understand subatomic particles. Human beings are fundamentally unable to have the most important things, peace and happiness. And then, of course, to extend that peace and happiness, to relate harmoniously with each other. So I believe that's what Bruno Groening means by yes, we've raised ourselves up, but we've really lowered ourselves because we've lost what's most important, our connection to nature and to God, to our very soul. That doesn't mean that God doesn't still live there. And if we're not in contact with that, it's like being a wealthy person that thinks they're poor. It's like being a wealthy person that's um, lost their, the PIN code, has lost their bank account number and can't make a withdrawal. So again, it comes back to valuing God and valuing nature and a natural way of living. So let's spend a little time and see how that phrase even lands, valuing God. To what extent do we value God? To what priority is God in our lives? And what I'm talking about is the feeling of connection to God and being guided by God. I'm not necessarily talking about how much time we spend in a church or reading a particular book. Now, of course, those things can support, but to what extent do we value connection with that which made us, that which sustains us? I've kind of learned the hard way that without God, I don't have anything. I mean, that's not literally true. Obviously, I might still have possessions and have friends, but without that fundamental faith and peace, the other things don't really matter. When we don't have that peace and we don't have a sense of faith, then if we don't have a feeling of connection to God, then everything else is kind of empty. That's what I've found is that those things are the foundation upon which we can enjoy connections with other people and we can enjoy material possessions and hopefully put them to good use. And Because without that feeling of connection to God, there's sort of a fundamental emptiness, a fundamental feeling of, what do you call it? Not feeling whole, feeling incomplete. And then we're constantly scrambling to get the next sort of feel good. Um, but if we have a connection to God, we have a deep faith, then, well, I'll just speak for myself. As I step into a deeper and deeper sense of faith and a more and more feeling of connection to God, there's less like grasping. There's less like, oh, I need to do this and I need to do that and I need to get this and I need to get that. Because without that feeling of wholeness, we're constantly seeking that sense of wholeness, that sense of peace. And we're seeking it in ways that just fundamentally don't work. And I think we can, you know, it's very easy to see that operating in the world today is like, what's the newest fad? What's the latest this? We're all, people are without that, well, again, I'll just speak for myself, without that sense of wholeness and that peace that I'm just constantly seeking to feel good, to feel at peace. Whereas with that sense of peace, it's like, you know, there's a new restaurant in town. Maybe I check it out, maybe I don't. There's there's less grabby, that grabby needy. Like I need. And Bruno Groening spoke. Many people just live their lives waking up, putting down some coffee, and moving nonstop until they go to bed at night without any time for reflection, any sense of connection really to their inner world. And that he said we need to make time for God. He said sooner or later everyone will have time for God. And that if we don't take good care, then we're going to end up sick and then we'll have time. But it's much preferable to do it earlier rather than later. So let's really sit with our own experience. When we feel connected to God, you could check in right now. We've been tuning in together for about 50 minutes. This good feeling, I know I have this feeling of utter delight and freedom. And I hope everyone, who's live and everyone who watches this has some flavor of that. Just notice that good feeling. Just notice how, for me, it's such a feeling of complete. Like I'm complete. Literally, I am. And that's when, the word heil, describing this energy, Bruno used the word two German words, Heilstrom. That's one of the many meanings of it: intact, sound, secure, unscathed. I don't think technically whole, WHOLE, is one of the meanings, but I think that's one of the most accurate descriptions. The energy of God, the presence of God, helps us to feel whole. Or maybe it helps us to connect to the wholeness that we already are, or the wholeness that's natural when the soul that we are is in communion with our Maker. It's not so important to get hung up on the words, but the experience of completion, fullness. I believe it's everyone's deepest desire. Don't take my word for it. Find out. So let's spend a little time in silence, taking in this good energy, looking at our experience. and looking at what is it we desire more than anything else. So to recap a little bit, in different ways, it's written that Christ pointed out that God's really close. The kingdom of heaven is within, or the kingdom of God. Even in that one verse I referred to earlier, that it's possible for God to actually live inside of us. Now, Bruno Groening was even a little more direct that God already lives inside of us and that it's merely that we've been taught wrongly in our harmful habits that keep us from noticing that. And so, a big part of the spiritual path is literally learning to value God and not just value God in the ways we've been taught. I was taught to value God by going to church, reading the Bible, saying prayers, spending time with other Christians, like that. That's what, and all that can be helpful. And what I mean by valuing God, which I believe is what Bruno Groening taught, what Christ taught, was to feel the presence, to seek connection and communion with God. And so, in this quest for God, we need to be mindful of keeping the focus on the essence, with the parable that Carl Jung gave of how easy it is to get caught up in structures that take us away from what's most important, that connection with God and guidance, being guided by God. And part of that comes to being humble, this recognition of our dependence on God and our dependence on nature as human beings. If I understand what Bruno Groening taught us, it's not so much that we need to find God as we need to recognize God. Recognize that God already is inside of us and all around us. If something's inside of us and all around us, we don't need to find it, we need to notice it. Finding implies that something isn't right here, right now. And it can take some effort, and it can take some work, and it can take some breaking of habits. As always, we have our very dear friend Bruno Groening to help us. We have Almighty God on our side. So it's a very holy, I want to say, journey process that we're involved in. We're seeking God, we're seeking peace. And what we're seeking is a foundation, something to build a life on. Most of us, I'll speak for myself, I built my life on material things, on money and relationships and work, those are all important aspects of life, but they're no foundation because none of them are inherently stable. None of them are completely reliable or reliable in the way that we need. The human body only needs to eat 2 or 3 times a day. My understanding is the soul has a need to be in connection to God always and to be aware of that connection. So that entails some humility, and that entails reprioritizing. Of course, the word Bruno Groening, that's often translated as great turnaround, means complete change. That's one of the meanings. A complete reversal. That means a completely different direction. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining in, and I wish you all much seeing and feeling of the divine as you go throughout your day, and much willingness to seek that out.